Yeah, hi. Today I'm going to cover the overview of the SharePoint 2010, and we will get the insights of the product, what exactly is providing, what functionalities it gives to the enterprise, I mean, small scale and also large scale organizations, and how is it booming in the market against all other ECM products. So how was the SharePoint earlier? So how did it evolve itself? So as you see it started with 2001 version, and then which was a basic version of SharePoint, which is giving just a site creation functionality, just one-click away site creation with some limited templates of sites. And then you see that 2003 again has come, and then it was also known as Windows SharePoint Services, WSS basically, and you also call that as SharePoint Portal Server 2003. And then it has become a real product in the market, and it has given a competition against other tools with the 2007 version. So what is it now? And so now in 2010 you got SharePoint Foundation version of 2010 and also SharePoint Server version of 2010. So now the 2010 version of SharePoint is split into two different licenses, Foundation and the Server. And it is again split into different licenses based on the organization needs and requirements. So Foundation is pretty basic. Foundation version of the SharePoint is pretty basic, that gives limited features, functionalities that is free, so that any developer or any end user can just install it or use it and get a feel of SharePoint 2010. And Server is something that the enterprise would need it for their entire requirements at the enterprise level. So let's see what we got in SharePoint. What exactly SharePoint provides in general, not speaking, with any specific version, but in general, what does it have? SharePoint core features. So SharePoint, you take any version, it provides site creation. So it has by default some templates that will allow you to create or set up a site on a click away. And so how does the content go? It goes in terms of lists and libraries. So that is where the content, or that is the form how the content will exist in SharePoint. And web parts. Web parts, again, these are some kind of user controls or components that present the data or that pull the data, and it's all sort of presentation and customization from an end user perspective. And pages, these are actually the pages that actually project the data. Say for example, if enterprise or organization, if they want to project some news or articles, then they exist in the form of pages in SharePoint. And alerts is something like, so for example, if the SharePoint or if any of the content that is going into the SharePoint, then the users who actually belong to that specific department or who actually use the SharePoint site, they want to get notified on what is happening in the system or SharePoint site, then they can just subscribe for the alerts. Versioning. So this is one a base that actually made SharePoint to grow or boost up to the existing features. So unless you give a versioning or you maintain the history of what you are actually doing or what content is evolving or being modified within the SharePoint system, so unless you maintain that, there isn't much possibility that you can cross-verify. So if you want to cross-verify what actually was and what actually it is, so if you want to do that, yeah, so versioning does that in SharePoint. and metadata. So metadata in general is something data about the data. So we're talking about properties of the content. Are you talking about some kind of a manifest file about some content? So it could be some columns. If you have the knowledge on the SQL, so it's nothing but the columns in the table, similar to that here. And you have the workflow for business process management, and to make sure that the content that is going into the SharePoint system is compliant to the business process. And security, yes. So we have a lot of features providing, a lot of functionalities that makes you to get the content ready to use it by the entire organization. So there should be a way, approach, or a strategy for you to set up some kind of security or some kind of permissions or limitation that should be given for each user depending on what access they should have. So that is where the security plays a role. So coming to the current version, SharePoint Server 2010. So what exactly it provides, and how was it improved from 2000, or how is it improved from the earlier versions? So you see that you see the circle with 6 categories. So every feature that is already boxed into this SharePoint product falls into this, either of these or one of these categories. So features are split into different categories: sites, communities, content, search, insights, and composites. So sites, so what does it cover? What functionalities does it actually give? So sites, like I said, you already have default site templates, and then you can just it's like an installation, like how you install the software. It's similar way, like you have next, 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 and select some options, or actually fits in your requirement. So you just keep clicking on next for 5 steps, and then you get your site set up for the entire department or the organization with all those libraries, lists where the content will reside in. Besides that, it also has the Office applications integration within the SharePoint site.
So I have a question for you here.
A vast,
Sir MJ, sir.
Yeah.
So how do you define a site?
Yep. Okay. So how do we define a site? So let's talk very general. Let's not bring SharePoint into the context, but let's say what is exactly a site. So site can, like we see a normal site can have a content. So content that you want to project to the public users, or it could be the intranet site that you want to keep it to your organization itself. So it will have the content. It could be news articles, or it could be some information about your organization. So it depends on the context what exactly the site will fall in. So let's take an example. You have a project within your department, and for the project you have a team, and for a project you maintain the deadlines, you track the deadlines, and you will have a dashboard displaying how the tasks are going on and who is doing what. And you will have a lot of documents or an Excel sheet, so giving a lot of information on the requirements, analysis, whatever is going through in the project. So you have a lot of documents, and then the final, so what exactly, so you should have a discussion board kind of. So if there is any question against a requirement, and if you want to track it down in some system instead of making it in an email chain, so you want some kind of discussion board, so where the users or the team members can just post a question, and someone who actually subscribe to the discussion board can just answer right there.
Okay.
So all the discussions, so and any other documents that you want. So you have these kind of things going on in your project. So if I talk about so your team, a project team, need a site to be set up, then Yes, so there is a team site template in SharePoint server by default. So which actually you can enterprise organization can use it to create a site. So that means you get a document library by default created where you can just upload all the documents related to the project, and you can categorize them in the folders as well. And then, like I said, the discussions, how to track them. So you by default have a template, discussion board templates that will allow you to, it's very similar to like comment to comment, how you talk or how you chat on an IM. So it's similar to that. You have a discussion board library. And then similarly, you have a task list, you have a, and you also have this Excel services that can be used, to plug in the Excel so that it is much integrated instead of you actually opening the Excel using your client software. Instead of that, you can just do whatever you want it within the SharePoint system itself. And it feels like you are just doing the Excel, but you're not doing something extra than that.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions that you have so far?
No, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. So you see that Office client integration, and then and compared to the previous version in 2010, you have a much improvement on the usability side, on the UI side basically. So you got that ribbon thing there. However, you see it in Office 2007 version. So if you observe any of the Office applications like Office, Word, Excel of 2007 version, you see that the entire toolbar is gone. A ribbon has come with a lot of icons as an option. So similar thing has been integrated in SharePoint 2010 so that the Office UI is much inclined with SharePoint as well. So that is what we call ribbon UI. And moving on to communities category. So what exactly it provides? So we've been talking that there's a lot of site creation that you can do it just like that with SharePoint. But how is it different from like the other ECM tools or the other ready to use site softwares? So it also provides a community as a socializing capability. So like if you can compare with the current market, yes, you can compare this community's category functionality with the social networking sites. Yes, so similar to Facebook or Twitter, microblogging sites. So SharePoint by default has that capability that each user can have their own My Site, they can have their own blogs and write wikis, and then whatever the activities that you've been doing across the SharePoint system, those can be tracked and shown like the Facebook feed, activity feeds. And apart from that, you can do tagging, and you can rate the content within the SharePoint. So whatever that you see here or listed down under communities is all out of the box. So you just need to configure them and set it up. That's it. It's pretty simple. And moving on to the content. So we've been talking about a lot of content going in, but there should always be a way to categorize the content or to classify the content. Otherwise, it'll become raw data, and then it'll be difficult to categorize or to find out what data is what and where exactly is the data. So that is when the content types will come into the picture to categorize the type of content that is going into the system. And how to categorize or classify the content. So you can use the term store that is given in 2010 version, so that you can set up at the system level, so which is at the enterprise level, that can be used by all the SharePoint systems within the organization. And then you, in 2010, in earlier versions, audio, video wasn't supported by default, but now in 2010 it provides some web parts and then other infrastructure by default that will allow to have the audio and video content also within the system by default. Moving on. So we've been talking about a lot of content going inside the system, but how to let the user or the business users find it easily. So SharePoint Search has the capability to show the results by social relevance, and then it has this phonetic search is something new that is in 2010, and then it has the fast integration as well. So fast is again a search that need to get a different license. So it provides some other additional functionalities apart from the out-of-the-box search as part of SharePoint Server 2010 license. So if the enterprise has a lot of content and a lot of other requirements to filter to get the data or to get the results in the search based on a lot of filters, then the enterprise or the organization might need fast license to integrate that with SharePoint Server. And then the insights. So we know that Google Analytics. So what it exactly does, it provides a lot of information on the traffic that's going in, on a particular site, and then the visitor information, and then what exactly is being viewed. So what is the highly viewed article, all that. So SharePoint also by default gives all the services. So for any SharePoint site that you actually expose it to the internet, or it could be an extra or an intranet. So you want to track down which articles are being viewed mostly, and so in the last month how is the SharePoint site being used and how many users, and then apart from that, it also generates some reports concluding from these analytics. And it also supports the chart web part. So in 2000s, an earlier version charts were not there. So if you have to provide some charts within the SharePoint site, then you have to develop some code to do that. But in 2010, by default, it does have that. So you have any charts already drawn in the Excel, then you can use the Excel services in the SharePoint that can be plugged into the pages, the web parts. So it's not actually developing the charts or any kind of Excel graphs that you already have it in the Excel client. You're not drawing them in the SharePoint or developing them in SharePoint, but it's kind of integration that you're trying to do it.
So what is the use of SQL Server in SharePoint? Sorry, MJ sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, I have a question. What is the use of SQL Server in SharePoint, sir?
Okay. So SharePoint, so if we compare the SharePoint with the normal .NET sites, so .NET site, so it's again a website that will need a lot of manual development effort to develop a site, and the site will have all the content within the SQL Server. So now SharePoint, comparing with the .NET sites or any of the sites developed based on the open source technologies, which might be using SQL Server or Oracle, or could be MySQL. So any server, any server, basically the DB server will hold the data. So the entire data will be saved in the DB server. So even in the SharePoint, it's the same scenario.
Okay.
The SharePoint server has the backend as a SQL. So everything and anything will go into the SharePoint server, SQL server, which is a DB server. So it's a backend for it. But speaking in terms of development or from an end user perspective, we always do everything in terms of SharePoint objects. We never play with SQL. We play with SharePoint objects that will internally handle the SQL operation.
Okay.
Does it make clear?
Yes, sir. It's clear.
Moving on to composites. Yeah. So moving on to composites. So composites is so say for example, if we've been talking about a lot of functionalities, features, a lot of configuration. So these can be set up by the administrators or at the farm level, so at the server level. Not an end user or a moderator can do it. Say for example, if I want to give some options or I want to give a flexibility to the department head who may not be the enterprise level head but could be a department head. So I want to give a flexibility for the department heads so that they can add some functionality by themselves to their own sites instead of making it as a development effort. So SharePoint gives a flexibility to the users, who are actually tech savvy, so they can configure some functionalities by themselves without any development effort, without writing any code even. For example, SharePoint server has a very good feature, I would say, which is in 2010, business connectivity services. So in case if we see that the market is now just inclined to SharePoint server, so that means all the legacy systems that are already being used in the enterprise, they don't want to just wrap it down, but they want the systems to be there and wanted them to be integrated with the SharePoint. So that is when the business connectivity services will come in place. So business connectivity service or the BCS will allow the SharePoint server to connect to the external systems. Say for example, if I was talking about the .NET site. So if the organization is already having a .NET site and they have a lot of data already stored in the SQL server. So now when they already have the now if they have the SharePoint server set up, so they want that data already existing in the other SQL server to be pulled into the SharePoint site. So then it can be done using the BCS configuration. So it'll get connected. So it acts as an interface between the SharePoint server and the external systems. And then it pulls all the data from the external system into the SharePoint server as an external content type. So which can be configured using a SharePoint designer without writing even single line of code, and which is very limited or at the scope of SharePoint site itself. It's not at the server level configuration. So SharePoint has given some of these functionalities at this site collection scope so that the administrators at the site collection but not at the server can themselves configure it instead of making the changes at the server level. And it also decreases the development effort. And SharePoint Server 2010 introduced sandbox solutions, which means even if you write the code or if you got any requirement to write the code and you want to deploy the solutions that you had built using Visual Studio, you don't need to deploy them at the server level, but you can deploy them at the limited scope at the site collection. So only for your site, you can deploy them so that it won't disturb any other sites of the enterprise. So I think so. So this is how the SharePoint 2000 has evolved from the earlier versions, and and it has gone against all the products. So that is how the competition has been tightened in the market against the ECM tools. So if you compare any other tool, either it provides the WCM, so web content management, or it could be process management, or a mix of it, but it doesn't actually provide, I would say especially the composites category and the communities category. So these might be missing, either one of the other missing in the other tools, open source tools, or the other software license tools.
Okay.
So like I described now, it's all in here again.